Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I am Sheryl Kristensen, Senior Core Faculty in the PhD in Management program at Walden. My purpose for enrolling in the Graduate Evidence-Based Coaching program was to learn strategies and acquire skills to use with my students. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My name is Ora Robinson, and I'm a contributing faculty at Walden University. My research methodology is grounded in qualitative inquiry, case studies, focus groups, in-depth interviewing, ethnography, and auto-ethnography. I entered the evidence-based coaching session to see if I can use coaching as a tool to incorporate into my nursing practice.
And I'm Annie Morgan. I'm an Associate Dean within the Office of Academic Affairs, and I teach in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. I completed the evidence-based coaching program because I feel a call to coaching. I feel called to empowering leaders to lead with their best selves. So as we begin and move to the next slide, I wanted to talk about the purpose of our study. And I think it's also important to define what we're talking about with respect to coaching. Mentoring and sponsorship were discussed in several of the sessions yesterday. So I think it's important that we differentiate among the helping practices. Coaching is not consulting or advice giving. It's not mentorship and it's not therapy. A coach facilitates development or well-being through inquiry and building upon the coachee's or the client's wholeness and resourcefulness. In coaching, the coachee creates the agenda and uncovers the answers or the vision or the goals that they have for themselves. The coach uses questions and deep and reflective listening to facilitate goal attainment or the development of the coachee. So what we'll share today with you is a blend of our research methods and preliminary results of our study. It's important that you know that we are continuing our meaning making and work together, so our findings are still emerging. This past spring, the three of us completed, among others, completed an evidence-based coaching certificate program through Walden's IO Psych department. Throughout the program and in our final reflections, we focused primarily on our own coaching practice and skills as a coach. But I couldn't help but think when we finished the program about the added experience that I had throughout the program of being coached. So the purpose of our study was to unpack our lived experiences as individuals, as women leaders, within the cultural context of higher education, as we were being coached. By conducting this study, we hoped to share our own knowledge, our interpretations and feelings about how being coached contributed to leadership development or to emotional growth or authenticity or well-being, and how coaching contributed to our own vision for our future work, for our volunteerism, or for our professional endeavors. So we can go to the next slide. When I approached my colleagues Sheryl and Ora, I brought the information about this particular conference and my feeling that we had this story to tell. So the parameters for the conference helped us to shape the direction for our study. We had just spent 6 months immersed in coaching literature, and now we use the Expanding the Women in Leadership Advantage call for proposals as motivation to look at select literature and findings about women in leadership, women in higher education. You get the idea. We used an initial brief scan of the literature to frame our purpose and our process and our methods for the study. Sheryl, do you want to share a little bit more about what has stood out in the literature so far?
Yeah, thanks, Annie. As you can see, we focused on 5 key areas. Due to time limits here today, I'm only going to focus on some of the initial highlights that I found regarding higher education as a cultural context. So as Annie said, our research is a work in progress, so our literature review is not yet exhaustive. Given that our cultural context fits within the higher education realm, I thought it kind of important to kind of set the stage regarding some of the information that has been that has come out of the literature. My initial search terms resulted in articles that really painted a negative story about higher education culture, and I was really intrigued by that. Certainly not all higher education organizations have the same culture. In the US, there is a historic ivory tower culture that has informed, provided norms and cues, and gave license or not to how many individuals engage with their respective roles and organizations. Here's just a few highlights. So let's talk about what organizational culture is. An organization's culture defines the proper way to behave within the organization. This culture consists of shared beliefs and values established by leaders and then communicated and reinforced through various methods, ultimately shaping employee perceptions, behaviors, and understanding. Ienko suggested that organizational culture can be analyzed from the perspective of two distinct levels. The first is normative culture, which is the formal aspect that refers to the ensemble of rules, positions, hierarchies with a formal character, the way they are written in the documents, rule the activity of that institution, where it is very clearly established the performance needed to be achieved as the first level of professional satisfaction of the staff. The second component is expressive culture. This is the informal aspect that consists of the feelings, aspirations of the persons that consist of the institution's collective. It's organizational ethos, organizational symbolic rituals, specific ceremonies, myths and stories about the organization and its heroes as informal standards to be achieved by one who wishes to be seen and appreciated within the institution as part of individual satisfaction or, depending on the case, group satisfaction. Geiger provided a very detailed overview of the history of American higher education, in which he positioned that historically the English colonists were initially informed by Reformation theology and education models. Fast forward through to the 1800s and even into the 20th and 21st century, we also know that historically education and property were markers of status. Not everybody had access to higher education. In fact, the earliest enrollments consisted of white males and white males who were typically of a high level social status. Over time, more colleges and universities established additional offerings, additional opportunities as a result of shifts in society, such as the end of the Civil War, World War II, and even more recently, the growth of online learning opportunities. I want to offer that I think that there are a couple of factors that have informed the normative and expressive levels within education, which include academic freedom statements, as well as accrediting body statements regarding governance. For example, academic freedom is a type of freedom of speech in which scholars should have the freedom to teach or communicate ideas or facts, including those that are inconvenient to external political groups or to authorities, without being targeted for repression, job loss, or imprisonment. While the core of academic freedom covers scholars acting in academic capacities as teachers or researchers, expressing scholarly viewpoints, and expansive interpretation extends these occupational safeguards to scholars' speech on matters outside of their professional expertise. Accrediting standards have, in the past, highlighted the importance of faculty ownership of scholarly decision-making. Researchers have found that the educational sector has the highest level of bullying across all industry sectors. excuse me, recent high-profile cases internationally demonstrate the impact and cost of bullying within higher education. And in fact, there have been a number of legal actions regarding such activities within higher education settings. We know that conflict in higher education settings has unique attributes due to prevailing expectations, climate, and culture. Faculty are often rewarded when functioning independently of others. As a result, when asked to work with others, some faculty do not necessarily engage due to their lack of experience in collaborative practice. Debate is a cornerstone of higher education and frequently shows up as the dominant method of communication. So this concludes my brief overview of some of the key findings about higher education culture. And now Ora is going to provide information about our journey into the methodology.
Okay, let's take a look at the journey into the methodology of why autoethnography. A brief definition of auto implies self-discovery of one's personal experiences with the phenomena. We wanted to share our personal experiences as women and women leaders in higher education. Auto fits nicely with coaching as it's one's ability for self-discovery to solve their own problems. Ethno is the understanding of one's cultural experiences, and we identify higher education as our cultural context. Graphy is the written word or the narratives where we describe and analyze the recurring themes and similarities. So why autoethnography? We wanted to help the listener, the reader, understand our experiences and insights while participating in peer and supervised coaching. We wanted to touch your heartstrings and bring insights and personal reflections about women leaders who experience different yet similar journeys in their leadership roles. Each journey led to professional and personal growth. Storytelling and self-reflection transcends oneself to engage in critical cultural analysis, interpretation, and thoughtful discourse. We considered ethical considerations because it was important to maintain ethics in our sharing our stories. Change spoke about the importance of protecting confidentiality in the characters that we were portraying to mask their identities, especially since we were referencing some of our work experiences. Similarly, Brockner and Ellis spoke about the complexities of ethics in qualitative research, but emphasizes the need to be ethically responsible to others and ourselves. Sheryl?
Oh, Sheryl, you're muted.
There, I do that all the time. After learning that there are several types of autoethnography, we struggled identifying with what resonated with us most. Bachner and Ellis highlighted several collaborative approaches to autoethnography, including dual ethnography, collaborative ethnography, collaborative writing, community autoethnography, co-constructive narrative, interactive interviewing, compassionate research, and participatory action research. We landed on collaborative autoethnography. Collaborative autoethnographies are when researchers write individual autoethnographies and simultaneously contribute their individual findings for collective analysis in a series of standardized steps.
We also came to autoethnography as a method that aligned with our social change mission. So we've mentioned Bachner and Ellis a couple of times. We'll add their book, which I think the three of us have all appreciated, called Evocative Autoethnography, to the list that I heard this morning is on the front page of the app. We'll add the title and the author's names for you. But they looked at the methodology as a way of life, this telling of stories and insights into the cultural context. Some of the methodological literature that we looked at points to autoethnography as feminist, as queer, or primarily for dissident voices. It's a method that calls for fluidity and intersubjectivity. And it's a way of ensuring that diverse, unique stories are told and heard. In this case, it's a method for ensuring that women's stories are told. We are women of different races and backgrounds and experiences in leadership and higher education. Writing our autoethnographies, or writing our experiences and our interpretations of their cultural contexts, is a socially conscious or socially just act. So we'll walk through a little bit about the process if you want to move to the next slide, Julie. So our process looked something like this. We started in the literature and with our call to investigate our experiences as women leaders and women in higher education. Then we set off writing individually at first about our experiences of being coached. We sought to paint the picture in our writing and storytelling of the culture of higher education that we've experienced and of being a woman leader in our fields. We spent time then, after the writing, reading and reflecting and pondering about what resonated with each of us in each other's writing. We came together to discuss what was resonating, to discuss what we'd written, and we did some reading aloud of our work with each other. Through all of these steps, we kept going back to the writing. We went back to the literature. We went back to our own reflections and made some refinements or additions, but we kept going back to our stories, both as listeners and as writers. We hope that you're going to experience that a little bit with us today, as you'll have the chance to listen to a few samples from each of our autoethnographies so that you become an active part of the research. We hope you'll listen deeply for what the writing conjures in you, and ask yourself about what resonates with you. Consider what is evoked by you in the writing. So Julie, let's go to the next slide. And what you'll see here, in addition to our research question, are three guiding questions that we used as we were setting about writing our autoethnographies. And so these were three primary questions, and then we also used some sub-questions that really got to sort of draw out from us our knowledge, feelings, and opinions about what we were writing. So Sheryl is going to start us with a reading from her autoethnography that exemplifies how her lived experience with being coached contributed to, and question, the first question that you see there, sub-question, how her experience of being coached contributed to her development as a woman leader in higher education. Are you ready, Sheryl?
I am off mute. I am ready to go. One scenario I presented in my buddy coaching session involved me wanting to figure out how to get my head in the space of disconnecting over the weekend. I was really at a critical point where I wasn't able to sleep for a long time and was experiencing side effects such as not remembering that I had just returned from the grocery store, physical fatigue, weight gain, brain fog, and all sorts of other things. I wanted to learn how I could come out of a weekend feeling like I just had a week-long vacation, because I thought that would help me with sleep and everything else. I was also conflicted and worried because there was a high expectation in the competitive culture I was in at the time that everyone would work 24/7. The buddy coach seemed to chuckle a little bit at my goal and stated that it wouldn't really be possible to come out of a weekend feeling like I had a week off. Kind of remember slinking in my chair and feeling like the shades on the windows were kind of coming down, hiding the light in response to her challenging response. I felt a little bit of dread and panic kind of come in because I came into that coaching session so excited at the opportunity to really try to strategize some action items that would help me figure out how to disconnect and really disconnect. She asked me what I was already trying to do, and I shared that I meditate, I exercise, I practice mindfulness as different ways to relax. But I also highlighted it with saying that in the workplace that I was in at the time, we really needed to be on all the time. And that I had found myself after several years of being in such a heightened sense of overstimulation, because work was always on my mind, I couldn't figure out how to switch it off. She suggested that I should try to just turn off my technology, turn the computer off, turn the phone off. And I said, I think that's an option and I can certainly do that to a certain extent, but it really didn't address my goal for that particular coaching session, which was to figure out a way to get my head in the space of turning off. I'm so used to hearing the phone or the computer beep all day, all night, bing, bing, bing. When emails, texts, calls, or IMs come in, I feared shutting down, because there was such the expectation that you needed to be available all the time. It seemed like the culture supported a badge of honor, that came with stories of working on the weekends and working at night and so on and so forth. As I sat in the moment and reflected on her feedback, I was a little bit depleted. I thought to myself, what just happened? My excitement of identifying coping strategies was diminished. However, it may have been for the best because when I continued to do the inner work through that coaching session, I started to come to the conclusion that trying to keep up with the expectations of that never-ending hamster wheel, simply were not in alignment with my approach to work or life. I tend to be much more balanced and realize that I was never going to fit into that really competitive 24/7, 365 mythos. And it was time for me to really kind of take back my best self and to bring my best self in the way that really was authentic to me, to my students and others. This would enable me to stay in alignment with what I think is my true north and allow that authenticity to come out and to wake up again. I found myself really reflective as a result of the buddy coaching and this autoethnography journey. Although I don't enjoy writing, interestingly enough, a few poems came to me while participating in this ongoing research project. Here's one of those poems. This is a haiku poem titled Leading in the Wild. Leading in the wild, white water crashing blue, blustering, gaining strength, clean, sustains life, order. And now Ora is going to share highlights from her autoethnography that reflect how the experience of being a Coach E contributed to her emotional growth, authenticity, or well-being.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was a good lead into emotional growth. Rogers defined coaching as the ability of one to be resourceful to solve their own problems. So I would like to just share a snapshot view of one of my coaching sessions. I grew emotionally when I experienced a pure coaching session that forced me to reflect upon a situation where I was immobilized to solve the problem. The problem was my supervisor denied a prior approved vacation after speaking with a student who complained that I was lecturing on sickle cell anemia. The supervisor informed me that I should not be lecturing on sickle cell anemia or any other African-American health disparities. I'm thinking, well, it says in the syllabus, blood disorders and sickle cell anemia is part of the blood disorder. And when I directed her to the textbook, the first section is health disparities, and African-American sickle cell anemia popped up. At any rate, she rescinded my vacation, knowing I was scheduled to speak at Walden's National Faculty Meeting as a part of professional development. Needless to say, I was in shock. And I noticed there was a male leader sitting in the back of her office. And I'm wondering, I wonder why he's here. Maybe she thought I was going to default into the angry Black woman myth. She still said no and had no regard of how that would impact me. I had to figure out, do I not go to the national faculty and lose my credibility, lose my part-time employment, or do I leave my full-time employment to maintain my credibility and my part-time employment? I went home and woke up later that night with chest pain. Long story short, ended up in the ER, admitted to ICU. No cardiac disease, anything. It was principal angina brought on by extreme stress. I had chose not to show, the coaching experience allowed me to share my anger and frustration and sadness in a safe, comfortable environment. It facilitated my emotional health and my mental health in terms of growing. I found that I could be resourceful in solving my own problems, finding healthy solutions that are beyond my control. In terms of authenticity, I shared my truth with different coaching members. The members were diverse, male, LGBT, Black, white, and Caribbean. As I told my story, I was observing the facial expressions. Some had tears, some were in awe. The Black peers could relate and slipped into countertransference, whereas the Caribbean stated that, oh, that's the American way, and invited me to her country. The white females and males demonstrated empathy, and some offered apologies for something they didn't even do. This session informed me that I must not slip into countertransference when I'm hearing similar stories from employees around race. In terms of my well-being, the story contributed to my overall well-being because I felt in a safe, non-judgmental environment to share my truth, my reality. Therefore, it helped me understand as a coach, a future coach, and a leader to be mindful of my facial expressions, my nonverbals, and not slipping into countertransference when hearing similar stories. I will turn you over to Annie.
Okay, I have a brief reading from my autoethnography. Thanks, Ora. In late November, when I was first being coached, I had a situation that I felt very comfortable bringing to the session. Coaching was assistive to my leadership and to my making a positive transition for and with my team. It was a tool for me, but I felt like it was my leadership characteristics and vision for leadership that drove the coaching. Coaching made me a better leader, but I had not before considered how it contributed to my development. This feels important to me. I never felt as if I was going into a coaching session with a deficit or from a weak position. Being coaching feels validating to me because it starts with what I'm doing or what I can imagine doing. This makes me think about how focused and narrow in a good way the coaching could be. When I focus on my vision for my leadership through some situation, coaching doesn't spend time considering how others might approach things or how things have been approached in the past or the other voices that I have. In that way, my vision doesn't become muddied by what I would deem a more traditional or masculine approach. Coaching helped me to listen to and develop my ear for my true inner voice. Okay, so you've heard pieces of each of our autoethnographies. And so as we move to the next slide, Ora is going to walk through how we started our analysis as we read each other's autoethnographies.
Okay, thank you, Annie. As Annie said earlier, the journey into the analysis preliminary, based on the round of raw data, each researcher reading their data for reflection and reading each other's data and sharing select stories out loud. Following is a brief overview of our data processes, and we put them in terms of phases because qualitative is huge, so we narrowed it down for you. The analysis was guided by a framework that included a brainstorming session to identify what approach would be best to analyze the data. Phase one, data collection of raw narratives. We just went away and wrote our narratives to the questions. Phase two, we reviewed the narratives by each individual researcher. Phase three, the identification of recurring themes and phrases. We picked out adjectives and terms that kept showing up in our writings and then compared it to the terms in others' writings. Phase four, the identification then of recurring themes based on the phrases and categories. Phase five, identifying the cultural patterns in the context of higher education. And phase six, the creation of a table that identify recurring things and commonalities and similarities. That is a work in process. We're fine tuning that. And then the recurring themes I would like to share with you were authenticity, having a safe place, non-judgmental, self-esteem, getting out the comfort zone, desirable to be likable, holding on to painful experiences, and being authentic. Now I would like to turn it over to Sheryl into journaling out the findings.
Thank you, Ora. So I'm going to get us started here. And in this particular slide, we're going to actually share some specific components of our respective narratives that reflect each of these themes. Our reflections and responses to the writing added to the data set. Writing autoethnography as research practice is a way to engage our narrative inheritance and a way to discover in the eruption of a story, a soft reminiscent light of accidental talk, in a burst of memory, forgetting a world of hope. Authenticity showed up in a couple of ways. One, we found that we could be authentic in our buddy coaching sessions. And two, we found that buddy coaching gave us license to emerge in more authentic ways. Here are a couple of examples of how authenticity showed up in our autoethnographies. One woman researcher wrote, I varied what I brought to coaching. I brought made-up scenarios, half-truths, past situations, and sometimes I brought the very real and raw insecurities, fears, or needs that I had related to my current work and leadership. And another woman researcher wrote, this case was very impactful for me as it brought up past situations that I have experienced negative evaluations from peers and supervisors. At this point, I did not have any emotional growth. My emotions took over as I spoke to the words on the page. I discovered that I still had unconscious pain from my past experiences of negative evaluations. This case allowed me to be authentic in my self-reflection and acknowledge the pain still exists, even though I thought I had forgiven those and moved on.
And then coaching provides a judgment-free safe space. You have heard some of the stories that accounted for that. It's important in order to provide a judgment-free space that we create an element of trust. 3 women felt the peer and supervised coaching was conducted in a judgment-free, safe place. Although one participant shared an example where she did feel judged during the session, and Sheryl mentioned that to you earlier. And then I wanted to have an immersion experience. I was hesitant in talking about diversity with a racial overtone. But since my goal was to be a leadership diversity inclusion coach, I figured this was a good playground to put it out there. And I wanted to see how other different folks thought about it. And I gained insight into my own perspective of my own unconscious bias through that process when discussing race and my goals. Another woman shared something very profound. Let me just read it to you. I was free to share the worst of what I was feeling or thinking in order to be more vulnerable. I was thinking in order to unwind and process those thoughts by way of questions and challenges from the coach. With the coach, I had nothing to prove. And in fact, the experiences was likely more helpful for the coach in training if I brought my brokenness or need for development as honestly as possible. The coach should come to the session as an active listener in order to promote a judgment-free safe space.
So moving forward with empowerment, here are a couple of examples of how empowerment showed up. One of our team here wrote, in 2020 and 2021, I am becoming, can't really say have become, a person learning to ask for help. And a second woman researcher wrote, coaching contributed to my overall well-being because I could speak out what was being held inside for fear of negative reprisals, such as being fired for freedom of expression. I used this scenario in 3 coaching sessions with different peer coaches from different racial groups, ethnicity, and gender. And now I think Annie's going to,
Ora's got self-esteem.
Ora's got self-esteem, okay.
Self-esteem. What is self-esteem anyway? Definition is one who has confidence and satisfaction with oneself. And all 3 women have different degrees of self-esteem. And each woman was faced with those who aggressively assaulted, verbal attacked their professional credentials and value to the organization. Some felt degrees of defeat and wanted to crawl back into a shell. One woman spoke about being told she was not valued based on receiving her degree online. And another shared frustration when her voice was not heard or suggestions, and very dismissive, which forced her to reflect and make a move to a more civil environment that embraced those ideas. I shared a time where my ID badge was pulled. I had a supervisor who took my ID badge, pulled it up, let the string come back upon my chest, and she knew I had chest problems and caused discomfort. Annie?
Yeah, I'm going to take the last 2 bullets. In autoethnography, knowledge is created through the writing. And in our collaborative autoethnography, we found knowledge creation through the reading as well. We had content findings, but we also had process findings. In one discussion session, I was so moved when Sheryl responded to Ora saying, reading your autoethnography evoked more reflection than writing my own did. This to me was the essence of autoethnography. Sheryl, I hope you don't mind me talking about you like this, but Sheryl discovered something about herself by reading another researcher's autoethnography. In a conversation that we had as recently as this week, as we were preparing to share with you, we had trouble discerning what we'd read from each other and what we'd written in the margins or how we'd responded to each other. We were discovering a blurring of the emotions shared in the writing and the emotions evoked in the reader. I think for me, the most meaningful discovery, process discovery that we made as a team came through in another dialogue that we were having about what we'd written, and more specifically about what we did not write. Each of us in our discussion at some point has alluded to parts of a story that we've never before shared with anyone, or potentially that we still weren't ready to share. We feel like there's something really vital about that in our research as recognition that as women, we don't yet feel safe enough to share our full selves or our full stories. We started the discussion about why this might be and about what our fear is about. But I think the important part of this for now is knowing that even in autoethnography, we're making decisions about our writing to protect ourselves or to protect others from things that we are afraid of. We can go to the next slide.
Where do we go from here? We will continue to analyze the data, identify recurring themes, similarities within the cultural context of higher education. These findings will contribute to social change and show how collaborative autoethnography can facilitate insight into the experiences of women in leadership and its impact on their physical and mental health. And Sheryl will lead us into final remarks.
Thank you so much, Ora and Annie, for this fantastic journey. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today as we really strive to share our authentic selves through this collaborative autoethnographic journey. At this time, we welcome any questions and comments. Thank you again.
And I was monitoring the chat throughout your presentation, and there are some individuals who are interested in the findings when they're published. And just so you know, the chat will be available to the presenters, so they will have your email addresses. Thank you for putting them in there.
Yeah, I saw that. I think we'll be glad to connect. Thank you.
I also, I'm going to put one of our instructors on the spot. So again, we participated in the Walden's graduate evidence-based coaching program. And one of the faculty in that program, Dr. Michelle McCartney, had joined us today. So I just wanted to acknowledge Michelle and her very important role in our journey as well.
Thank you, ladies. And I believe Dr. Jane is here.
Dr. Jane is here.
Dr. Jane,
So-
Dr. Jane Coddington, I didn't see you on the list. Another one of our awesome faculty.
Great work. Great work.
Thank you.